I'm Tanya Dua. I'm the Senior Technology Editor at LinkedIn News. And joining me now is Jason from Google Vertex AI. And Jason, do you mind giving us a quick intro? And for those of the people that aren't familiar, what's Vertex?
Sure. Thank you so much, Tanya. I'm Jason Gelman. I lead product at Google Cloud for our platform for machine learning called Vertex. This includes the way that enterprises purchase models like Gemini. It also includes models like OpenAI, Anthropic's model, Claude, and Llama, the meta models as well. So you can buy first-party, third-party models from us, partner models, open source models, all through Vertex, and then you can deploy them to endpoints and use them in your business.
So just to clarify, the OpenAI was a
No, we sell
Yes.
the other way to talk about it is we sell every model except OpenAI's.
Okay.
That is the shorthand when we talk to customers.
Yes.
So
just to clarify.
Yes.
All right. So Jason, obviously, there's Google Cloud, there's AWS, there's other competitors in the space, hyperscalers, who obviously are all, also investing in AI as much as you guys are with the Vertex AI platform. So how do you differentiate from all these competitors in such a rapidly evolving space? What do you say is your USP?
So Google has the full stack in a way that no other competitor has. So we've been investing in our custom silicon, our TPU, for the better part of a decade. So we're now on Trillium, which I think is V6. And so we've been looking at this from Google's perspective for quite a while. We run Google based on the silicon, and I think that's been differentiated in that we've really battle tested that part of the stack in a way that nobody else did before OpenAI had released any of its models, before Microsoft was really using these models at scale, before AWS was hosting large language models. So we had the whole stack in place 2+ years ago, before any of this became something that lit the world on fire. So that's the beginning, the base there. We also have our own first-party model called Gemini. We've been doing research into these models for many years. As the world knows, we invented most of this technology to begin with. And so we've been constantly improving on this technology. And we look at it both from the enterprise perspective. So we have millions of developers and many, many tens of thousands of large enterprises that are all using our models, giving us feedback on those models. And then we also have consumers using the consumer Gemini products. They're also working in those products and giving us feedback on them as well. And so that combination is fairly unique. We also took the Vertex platform that existed before LLMs were really interesting and have extended that to support LLMs. So we're the only ones that have done all of those things. And we've got a pretty bright future ahead.
So you definitely got Gemini, but as you mentioned earlier, you also provide access to other LLMs if an enterprise may want to diversify. Would you say that you're agnostic in terms of what enterprises end up choosing, or do you hard sell Gemini over others?
So I think our teams generally lead with Gemini, but from a product team perspective, we're agnostic. And I don't think, if you look at our platform, I don't think our experiences are 100% even across all of our Gemini models and the open source and third-party models, but we're actually working hard to make that experience the same. So things like tuning and distillation, serving speeds and scalability and purchasing flows, all the things that are sort of the behind-the-scenes things that have to all come up together. It's important to note that even adding features to models, like I just named 5 or 6 of them, we were rolling them out feature by feature, even for the Gemini models through most of this year. And we've just gone to a whole set of features that ship with every new iteration of the models. So for us to do this for the Gemini models and then also for the world's models is a complex engineering feat. And so we're working on it, and we've put a lot of effort into it. And so you'll expect to see that over the course of the next 3-6 months, we should be pretty close to parity.
So, obviously, we've been hearing about the transition to AI now. You speak to anybody who's seen these cycles before, and a decade ago, it was the shift to cloud. Last week, I was talking to an investor who said, now AI is a cloud and cloud is AI. Having been through that shift yourself, would you agree? And if not, say more.
So I've been working in cloud AI for, I think it's 8 years now. So throughout a longer period of cycle, I think actually cloud and AI may be even a little bit more divorced than they used to be. Before LLMs came around, for you to do AI in the cloud, the first thing you had to do was take all of your data and move it to the cloud. So that actually required going pretty deep into all of your IT teams, figuring out which workloads could be moved to the cloud or how to mirror this massive amount of data to the cloud, and then starting a giant workflow to train a model, and then you wanted to update that model often. So you actually had to build out a lot of cloud infrastructure before LLMs to have an AI model. Now, you just use an API. And that API, you don't have to move any of your data to the cloud. So you call that API, it's stateless, and you can have a cloud deployment with AI without moving anything else in your entire business to the cloud. So that's actually a democratizing function of LLMs. That doesn't mean that the rest of cloud isn't growing, and you see pretty strong numbers. And I think probably in cloud provider, hyperscale provider land, the numbers have always been really large around infrastructure. So just raw compute and storage. Those have been where cloud has always sort of been most robust. And so you're seeing AI layer on top of that. And some of those constructs are used by AI. And some, you want to move your, a bunch of data up to the cloud, you're buying storage. And then you want to do pre-processing or post-processing. And so it's a complicated story where they're all interrelated. But I actually think you could do AI using cloud-based models and really have a very narrow position in the cloud, or you could go all in on cloud. So I think they're not necessarily completely related.
So talking about sort of applications, you were just telling me you take meetings all the time, and you're obviously encouraging the product's adoption in the enterprise. Are there an example or two of enterprise use cases that you've seen with Vertex AI that you really are impressed by?
I think there are obviously quite a few. I'm talking to customers all the time. They tell us when they're unhappy as much as when they're happy, and that's my job as a product person is to figure out where we're not quite making it. The places where I've seen customers be really successful lately, we mentioned it in our earnings call. Snapchat has gone all in on some of their most key use cases in their My AI chatbot using Gemini. And that's really leveraging Gemini's ability to do understanding of multimodal inputs like images. One of the canonical use cases is homework help. Their user base tends to
skew younger, yes.
Tends to skew kind of into that demographic. And so we're seeing it not just with Snap, but with other customers globally as well. And Google has a product called LearnLM. And so we're folding a lot of this like pedagogically sound method of teaching students, not just give you the answer, but really help you understand and learn. So we're watching that all the time, as is Snap. But they found much higher engagement once there really was a purpose to come to their chatbot. And so we're seeing that just chatting doesn't necessarily hold engagement for a really long time. What task are you accomplishing? And for students, their demographic, it's help with their homework. We also see in larger enterprises, Mayo Clinic has petabytes of data that are up in the cloud already, and they need to understand it and do research. And we've heard from hospital systems that even delivering care is really difficult because of the amount of research that's coming out. I have a family member who's an oncologist, and he says his team of doctors can't figure out a care plan that really is up to date with the latest science just from memory anymore. There's too many papers coming out. Because they want to deliver the highest possible quality of care. So they're using our models to digest all of the papers that are out. And then even if they go back and read the papers where there's recommended science coming in that's new, they at least can find that needle in a haystack of the fact pattern that's presented with their patient and match it to the best possible science. And then our models help process that just sheer amount of data.
So I just asked you cool applications you're seeing right now. What are applications that people aren't thinking of yet that you think could be game changers?
This is probably where our customers lead me more than I lead them. However, we're starting to see more multimedia inputs. We obviously know that the models are now capable of generating audio. We have some really cool examples. It's not using a new version of Gemini, but using multiple models in our Notebook LM podcast creation, the audio overview features, and
That's really, Notebook LLM is really cool. If you guys haven't checked it out,
Yes.
we cover it on my newsletter all the time, so you can subscribe to that too. It's called Tech Stack on LinkedIn. Sorry for the shameless plug. Go on, Jason.
Shameless plug for Notebook LM. The team is fantastic. The product is really compelling. I've used it to digest information. I've taken an academic paper, put it in, generated a podcast about it with the two hosts talking to each other. The key learning there was it asks the questions that I didn't know I was supposed to ask. And so these are some of the insights that I found to be really interesting as the models are able to do things. I'm also not really good at prompting models to create an image. So like Imagine is our image creation model. And when you know how to use it, it's amazing. It generates remarkable images. However, I'm not a prompt engineer. And so what I do is I go into our Gemini models and I say, you are a prompt engineer, you're prompting an image model, write this out. And so I can actually express myself in a very limited way and then get the outputs that I'm looking for out of the model. So I'm finding that tying the models together is starting to give me lots of really good results. And I'm projecting ahead and wondering, does that all collapse into the same model at some point? Or do we still want to have spike state-of-the-art capabilities with specific models? We're also looking into the future around agentic flows and agents, and happy to talk through any of that if you'd
I am
like.
glad you brought that up. But before we dive into agents and agentic workflows, and everyone's really bullish on them right now, we talked about the advantages and good examples you're seeing of use in the enterprise. But what are some challenges that your clients or customers are telling you about as their organizations implement and scale these generative AI solutions?
I think Gartner has been publicly saying we're sort of entering the trough of disillusionment with AI, and I've been prepping my team. I've been around long enough to have seen a few of these cycles, and I've asked my team to think about how to make that trough as shallow as possible so we can get off to productive uses of the technology, because there is a lot of hype and people get tired of the hype relatively quickly. So we're kind of probably entering that moment. We saw earlier in this cycle, we saw a lot of people get surprised by the cost of AI. We've brought that down by something like 92% this year. And so it's interesting to hear where there are still some use cases where cost is a consideration. And then there are other use cases where actually the customers really just want better quality or are happy with that value prop, but we're talking about the downside, not the upside. So there are still pockets where the cost has come down to such a point where the kinds of things that customers are looking to do with AI have actually changed. Because if it was a really expensive luxury good, you only do these things. But now that it's a much more commoditized, especially at the smaller model range, much more commoditized offering, you actually look around and it's a big hammer and you're looking for nails. And so we're starting to see that broadening of use cases. I still think that there are questions around data and how do I integrate with all of the people that would be using AI in the organization. How do we feed the model the right data? So retrieval augmented generation workflows are very popular. We're seeing a question about, do we use the long context window? And Google's models have this 1 or 2 million token context window, depending on the model you're using. And so you can actually reason over large portions of code bases or lots of multimodal inputs. And as I've played with this in all of our test settings, you get better results when you're reasoning over some of these things all at once. And so I think that there's a lot of frustration of trying to actually make it work, and there's lots of things to try still. And so the frustration right now is around evals, picking the right model, because we offer, of the big popular models, there's 30 or so APIs. And we have hundreds of models that are easily available, but of the biggest ones, that we offer just almost I wouldn't call it a confusing range, because there's a reason why each model family has different sizes, but it's too many to really understand and test on your own. And so we're rolling out tools to help with better evals. And that's a consistent theme that we tell to everyone else. We look at it for ourselves as well, really measuring what you're looking for and how to deliver that.
So you brought up agents and agentic applications. This is something that's come up in our previous two panels as well. Hype or reality? Everyone's talking about it, but when am I actually going to have an agent look through my calendar and book me a flight because it knows I'm off between Christmas and New Year's?
Way overhyped still. I'll just flat out, way overhyped. That scenario, the one I use is, how do I find a camp for my 7-year-old this coming summer, right? That's these complicated information gathering, understanding something about you. Are you flying economy, premium economy? Are you chartering a private jet? You're probably chartering a private jet. And so
that's news to me.
so we have, it needs to know a lot about you, right? So there's a question of how much do we as humans want to let the models understand in our personal lives and persist that information. Right now, those models, they're still a frozen piece of code. So the model doesn't know anything. You can shut it off at the end of the conversation. But how much of that, of your personal information, are you willing to feed into the model to get the results you're looking for? How much of it does it actually need to know? And then you said, is it always looking at your calendar? Right? So is it a persistent agent that's doing something and watching all the time? Or do you say, please look at my calendar, find when I'm off, when I've marked myself as out of office? Or should it know, right? Again, my kids' school schedule, we know a year ahead of time when they're off from school. It's not a particularly difficult thing to figure out.
Yeah.
So there's certainly quite a bit of future-looking action there of even understanding the problem. And so the key to agents is really having a task and then being able to break that task into planning steps.
Right.
So your example of book me a flight, it's not just book a flight, right? You want it to book your whole vacation.
Yeah.
So what does a vacation mean?
Yeah.
And then how does it, through either a series of workflows that it determines on its own, maybe it spawns an agent that does flight booking. And that flight booking agent, it's actually a well-trodden path. There's APIs that are out there. You know pretty much what those steps are.
Yeah.
So maybe the flight booking agent is kind of half coded up already with a really defined workflow.
But the nuances, the context,
That's
as you
right.
say, we're not there yet.
Exactly. So we're looking at different frameworks for actually how to bring agents to market from Google's perspective. There are a bunch of open source ones out there. Customers are playing with them, giving us feedback. Some people use them on our infrastructure. Some of them are more client side, some are more server side. Just like what I said before about monitoring and evaluation, enterprises looking to deploy agents, that's the common baseline. They actually do need to understand what's going on to be able to log everything. If you're a financial services company, you have regulators. You need to be responsible to them.
You don't want your agent telling someone to make an investment and then them losing money on it, right?
That's certainly not. But even you don't want the agent just going off and transferring money to different places. That's even worse. So there are that observability and those guardrails are probably as hard of a problem to solve for as the models being able to do this planning step. So we're working on both. We're working on the infra for the guardrails and the monitoring and observability, and we're also working in the research area around model planning. And then you often hear of it as tool use.
Yeah.
So, how do I go out and do something? Maybe it's, call a calculator. It could be as simple as, how do I figure out my actual budget? The models, are not designed to do math.
Yeah.
So why don't we just call a calculator? So that's tool use for code execution is how we think of it from the product side.
So we were talking about agents in particular, but you brought up guardrails. Now, a lot of ethical concerns around AI enterprise use, particularly when it comes to data safety, privacy, regulation. According to your customers, what is the number one top of mind thing for them in terms of concerns, and how does Vertex GenAI address these challenges?
So we've spent, it's not just the last 2 years, Vertex has spent, I think, about 5 years working on becoming globally compliant with pretty much every regulation that we can find. So if you're an enterprise and you come and talk to us, I have a whole slide that is very small font at this point, looking at global regulation and everywhere we're compliant. So that's your step one. We call it enterprise readiness. You can't even engage with any provider of an LLM until they've hit that bar.
Yeah.
So
Baseline.
that's right. So it's the floor. That's not the ceiling. That's the floor. But you have, whether you're a German bank or an American medical institution, right? Either one, you've got different regulations, and it's not just that the model has that regulation compliance. It's that the data storage, the data residency, where is your processing happening? These are, it's a bunch of really difficult things to do. And so the hyperscalers tend to invest in these things. Our customers tend to be the ones with these requirements. And so we've gone around and spent a considerable amount of time trying to make sure that we're as compliant as we can globally. If there's someone that brings us a gap, we go back and we fix it. It's not always overnight. Some things have to go all the way down the stack, which is how we manage, we manage our own infrastructure. So that's helpful where you actually can get that level of control. So that's the baseline on compliance. We also spend a lot of time helping customers to understand that Google Cloud is different than Google Consumer, and our terms of service are very enterprise focused in the cloud. So we never.
So if someone is using Gemini through Google Cloud and has an enterprise, buy-in, whatever they're searching for is not going to go to train Gemini on the consumer side.
Correct. So we have our terms of service. All of the prompts and responses are encrypted, and they hit the server, and it's stateless, so we don't remember anything there, and we never see what your prompts are or what your responses are. It actually makes it a little bit harder for us to help customers when they have problems. So we have to go back and ask, can you tell us what didn't work correctly for you, so we can go back and actually understand it. Because without somebody explicitly sending us their prompts, we never see them.
What about the biggest ethical concerns that your sort of clients bring up? So obviously you talked about privacy. We addressed that. Are they still concerned about hallucinations as much? We also talked about data privacy, but how are you addressing hallucinations?
So I think of hallucination as probably a technical shortcoming more than a pure ethical concern. The impact is that the model is just wrong. So right, and I think at this point, the fact that the models hallucinate is well known globally to any sophisticated user of the model. So as an enterprise, if you are developing using these models and creating products for your customers, then whether it's pre-processing or post-processing, certainly one way to approach understanding that this might happen. We also have some releases that are making their way through our pipelines where we've managed to reduce hallucinations quite a bit. It's not that you've got deterministic models where they're going to eliminate the hallucinations completely, but it's a problem that our research teams have been working on very actively. I'm encouraged by the eval results of what I've seen. Saying that we have the best version doesn't mean that we have a perfect version. So it's one thing to say we only hallucinate 1% of the time. It's a different thing to say we never hallucinate. However, I think the bar with humans is humans are not right 100% of the time either. And so a human may be very confident in an answer and very wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a question of how do you create workflows around the models, knowing that the models are fallible, just the way you create workflows around humans, knowing that humans are fallible too.
Can we talk a little bit more about Google's vision for multimodal AI? You mentioned a few sort of tools that you already have, but how is that being implemented in Vertex AI, and what new features or improvements can we look forward to in the near future that we're not even thinking about? Notebook LLM is obviously a great example, but what are we not even thinking of?
So I think you've seen, there's two versions, right? There's how do we look at all of the modalities as inputs and all the modalities as outputs. And so once you've got bundles of these, how do you make them all exist in as close to the same model as possible? And I think you're seeing the industry as a whole is moving in this direction. It is challenging getting the model to perform at the same quality with every modality in and every modality out tends to be challenging. It doesn't, from a consumer perspective though, Notebook LM is one of those examples where it doesn't matter under the hood if it's a whole bunch of models or one model. You put some input in, models do the work, and then you get some output. There are some advantages to collapsing all the modalities into a single model where you can reason over those input tokens very easily. So if you have, for instance, if you have a multimodal model that can take a song in and put an image out, right? And you can't really do that if you have to reduce the song to text to tokens, right? So there are some advantages. I think they at some point get theoretical, or I just don't have the imagination to really think about what that is. Maybe if you're running a giant concert venue and you actually want to have music in and image out in real time or something, that could be really cool. And again, I'm often more impressed by what our customers end up doing than what I can think of back sitting at my desk.
So I'm going to open it up to audience questions that are coming in. Unsurprisingly, agents are a very hot topic. So the first question about agents is, what are some methods that we can use to monitor AI agents?
So as we roll out our agents, frameworks, APIs as our infrastructure, which we haven't really rolled out as Google publicly yet, we will have a suite of tools for observability, monitoring, debugging. So you've seen some things like this in some of our other enterprise products. We have products called like Dialogflow and Contact Center AI, where you've got a lot of these similar agentic flows where we've been working on them for several years. And so we've learned from customers and from the market what they need for this type of observability, and we'll apply those learnings to agents as well.
The second question here, also about agents. How can you enable continuous learning for these agents and interactions with other agents? And I also saw earlier, how do digital ads fit into agents? I'm sure Google is thinking about that.
So I guess there are two interesting questions. While I'm not in the ad space, digital ads obviously are a large portion of what Google does. I think there's an interesting question of this customizability of ads, and we had a really cool. It's not 100% digital ads in that they're physically manifested in this example, but we worked with the Pods Moving Company. There's a cool video online. You can go find it, search for like Pods Moving Company in Google. They actually have these like trucks they drive around New York City that are like moving billboards, and they use Gemini to generate time and location specific content on each one of them. They drove it through every neighborhood in New York City, and they like referenced the weather and the neighborhood and all sorts of things. And apparently it drove sales by like 30%. So we're seeing this like hyper personalization, customization drive real results. And so if you're like in Astoria and it's raining out and the truck is driving through in the middle of the rainstorm, maybe that content is generated that's specific to those places. And maybe
buy an umbrella.
But like maybe go to the bodega and buy an umbrella. It's right around the corner or something. That's very different than, if you were, I don't know, maybe out in Staten Island where there aren't as many bodegas. And so you've got this like, so I think this hyper-personalization of advertising is really interesting. And it doesn't need to be personally identifiable information. It could just be things like location and weather, and maybe, if the Yankees had won, maybe there'd be a whole lot of other ads around that. That could be really fun. So I think that over time, I think that's potentially going to be really interesting. Continuous learning is another. It's a topic that I don't think we're there yet. Is honestly, I think the technology.
You call them overhyped, so clearly we're not there yet.
Yeah, I think I'll say it's a great question. We should ask it again next year.
All right. Speaking of next year and the future, what is your one big prediction when it comes to generative AI for 2025?
I think we're seeing the market move in two directions. So we ignore modalities for now. We're just looking at the model and how capable the models are of reasoning. Smaller models today are doing as well as state-of-the-art models were 12, 15, 18 months ago. So these really small models are performing incredibly well. And we're seeing just this continued cycle of how do we take the best of the model and make it really small, make it cheap, make it fast. That's some of the benefits of a small model. And then you're also seeing this like runtime inference introspection mode where latency is really long, but the model is asking itself these questions and looking back on its own answer. And so you're seeing the beginning of that as well. So I think the market's going to move in different directions.
Jason, thank you so much again for your time. This was super fun, and I'm sure I'm going to talk to you very soon again.
So thank you for having me.
Yep.